Hi, Tom.
Hi, Harry.
I have here with me today Tom Hurster. Tom is a clinical social worker who has been working with children and adolescents for the past 45 years. He is an adjunct professor at the Graduate School of Social Work and Social Research at Bryn Mawr College, where he has been teaching for 24 years. He is about to retire after 44 years at the Benchmark School, which is a school for children with language-based learning disabilities. Tom has been on the board of the PAGPS since 2008. He has also co-chaired the special interest group at the AGP Clinical Work with Children and Adolescents since for 15 years, and he is the proud recipient of the Harold S. Bernard Award. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you. You make me sound pretty important. Mostly, I'm an old man who's been doing this a long time.
Well, you have a very youthful heart.
My wife says I'm just immature.
Well, I don't live with you, so she gets to say that. All right, I'm going to start you off with some warm-up questions, some softballs. So to start off, what first drew you to group therapy and what's kept you in it?
Well, I think that what really drew me to working with groups was being involved in a number of groups as an adolescent, including being a member of a rock and roll band. And I often think about that I learned my group therapy skills by trying to negotiate working with 5 other musicians and kind of formulating music together, dealing with different opinions and egos. But it was so powerful and so confirming. I was not the leader, but I certainly was an active member of that. But when I started working with adolescents after college, I worked at the Institute of the Pennsylvania Hospital, and was hired as an activities therapist. And I used to take groups of kids, mind you, groups of kids backpacking on the Appalachian Trail. And I used to take groups of kids in the evenings and play basketball poorly or do a poetry or reading group. And I got formal training in group therapy at that point. And it was through that I really realized how powerful groups are. And I ran co-led a group with a nurse practitioner for 3 years of hospitalized adolescents. We met twice a week, and that sold me. But I think the other thing that really sold me was going into my own personal therapy and group therapy. I was a member of a therapy group for almost 40 years. I got a little better over the time.
So time well spent. Just out of curiosity, what did you play in your band?
I played bass guitar. I was okay. I was not great, but I was okay. But I could hold my own.
Love it. Okay. What do you think most people get wrong about group therapy?
Well, I was talking to a bunch of teaching colleagues the other couple months ago and actually we have a book club, and I was talking about the power of group therapy. It was related to something in the book. And all of them admitted that they had been in individual therapy, that they said they would never be in a group because they felt like they didn't want to hear other people's problems, that they really wanted to talk about their own. And I said, the power of group is being able to kind of both look at yourself through other people's eyes. It's that power of feedback and to really kind of experience in the present the same issues that you're talking about that brought you into therapy, and to be able to hear things openly and honestly, but also to be able to help other people. So it's, I think people worry about that it's individual therapy watered down, and I think it's something completely different and more powerful. And the research has been real clear that it is as powerful a change agent as individual therapy. And there's been multiple studies that's shown that. And there's even been studies that shown that it's actually more effective.
I love how you mentioned that mentors are able to help others. I think that piece is missing from individual therapy because in individual therapy, you're never there to help a therapist. But the act of not focusing on the self, but focusing on another and then seeing something that you do ameliorate somebody else, I think is extremely powerful for sure. What's something else besides what I've said that happens in group that simply can't happen in individual therapy?
There are things that you just would have a very hard time saying directly to clients in individual therapy. Coming from you and given the transference, it would be powerful, blow them out of the water. It would feel potentially hurtful. It would create a rupture. Hard truths, if you would. But in In group therapy, people say those things, and they can be difficult to hear. They can be create emotional conflict, emotional upheaval, dysregulation. But they're said and they're out there, and allows then the client, the person hearing it, to have to really work with it. And so I think that that's the thing that's really, and you get multiple perspectives, and someone can really just have a really enjoy something about you, and someone else could find that also irritating. And so you have these multiple dimensions that really, which sort of mirror the, which not sort of, they mirror the real world. And it gives you an opportunity to really deal with it. I think the other thing that really gets is much more prominent in group therapy than it is in individual therapy, although it exists in both, is dealing with the residual stain of shame. Shame is an affect that's really present in most groups, and it's groups are really a powerful place by which to deal with issues of shame because it's done in a collective way, but with a lot of support. I use as an example with graduate students. I ask people to think about perhaps one of the most shameful or embarrassing moments. And people are always surprised that it can be 60 years ago, but when you recall it, it feels like it happened yesterday. And there are very few other emotions that quite have that saliency that it's sort of always there. It's kind of like a stain on us. And so it's really easy to re-experience. And also that's a problem too, because it gets tapped into inadvertently. So, I mean, if you think about it, you can feel guilt, but it's really the shame around the guilt that the act that you feel more than the actual guilt itself. That's the residual. You can remember being really angry, I think all of us can conjure up those first feelings of falling in love or first love. It's, but it's not as visceral as when you think about a shameful moment.
So why is it easier to work that stain of shame out in a group?
Because you have an audience that kind of shame is really when we transgress against ourselves, about our internal code. And it's against a backdrop of a kind of internal audience. And in this case, you have a real audience who can kind of reverberate with, reflect back on, mitigate, help you to mitigate against it, reassure you that it wasn't as bad as you make it sound. There's just something about it, sort of re-experience it in the presence of others. It sort of allows you to kind of move beyond it.
What role has PAGPS played in your professional life? And why does a society like this matter?
I joined PAGPS because it's the local I was a member of AGPA long before I joined PAGPS, and I felt that I needed to get involved more locally. At the time, I was very concerned with the fact that Philadelphia used to be a hub of group therapy. I mean, we had and still have a number of very prominent, nationally recognized group therapy figures in our community. One, Yvonne Agazarian, is now deceased, was considered one of the leading innovators in group therapy. But we got Virginia Brabender and April Fallon, who've written extensively about it. And there were a number of other people in the Philadelphia area, particularly years ago, who were really early founders, if you would, of the group therapy movement. But that's fallen off in recent years. Fewer and fewer people are going into most graduate school. Many, if not most, graduate schools have dropped group therapy as a treatment option. I was concerned about the fact that there were just, if you wanted to find a group for an adolescent or for an adult, even there were not many people doing it. And similarly, I'm one of only a handful of people in the entire Delaware Valley who are running outpatient group psychotherapy groups for youth. And I just felt that I wanted to be part of trying to correct that and to kind of change it and to bring it back to its prominence.
If you had a young patient, and I say young patient because you work primarily with adolescents now in group, and they were sitting on the fence about joining a group, what would you say to them?
I'd say, who do you spend most of your time with in your life? And they would likely say, my friends. Or they might say, I wish I had more friends, or I have a hard time making friends. And then I would say, I think group therapy gives you an opportunity to develop those skills and to spend time with others. I would say that group therapy allows you to see yourself the way other people see you and allows you to get support from people who have experiences that are near to yours. There's a value from hearing from somebody who's the same age, who has a very different experience, how they perceive you or how they would manage a situation, as opposed to hearing about that from, say, me. And that's the value of group therapy. People really change in groups. Adolescents grow in groups. If you think about it, it's the hallmark of adolescence is that sense of expanding your world into a world of peers. So it just makes sense that therapy should take place in that context as well.
You've been running ongoing co-ed psychotherapy groups for high school age adolescents. What do teenagers need from a group that adults don't? And what do they give the group that surprises you?
Well, there's a lot of differences between teen groups and adult groups, although there's probably more similarities and differences. One of the things that kids do is that they have a very hard time sort of condensing an experience. And so when they begin to talk about things in their lives, they have to go through all the details, which used to make me a little crazy at first. And they have to sometimes add my friend, this person, my friend, that person. And so they kind of have to populate the entire field with all the players, which takes time. But I think more than even with adults, there's a sense of validation that happens when you have another in a group of adolescents, when other people can kind of say, I've been there, or I feel that, or I know that, or I go through a similar sort of thing, or that's just like, I think adults are looking for a different kind of insight into themselves. And so it often takes a while, for instance, to get an adolescent group to get to the point where they can really share their personal experience to somebody, to give sort of feedback as opposed to kind of validation and support. But that validation and support's really critical because I think that that's the primary need for most adolescents when they first come into the group. And then to get the kind of personal feedback is becomes sort of the icing on the cake, if you would.
So that validation from the other members saying, "Yeah, I understand what you're saying," or "I have been through that." That would be the universality factor. Yes?
Right. Yes. I like to say that groups are a great place to work through microaggressions, but they're also a great place to experience microaffirmations. And so if you are a trans girl or transitioning and members of the group begin to really experience you the way you see yourself, and they really acknowledge your femininity and your gender. And to have that for the first time is just powerful. Or if you were a person of color who has really never felt marginalized, often in spaces that are dominated by people who are not of color, and to I kind of have people really experience you fully as sort of who you are. That's kind of that affirmation becomes just a really critical, important thing. And so I think so. What am I trying to say? I guess that becomes a major part of this curative factor. So there's a universality, but it's also the recognition by people who are not like you that value you in some way. That really is really a powerful change factor.
You've been at the Benchmark School serving children with language-based learning disabilities since 1981. What does group work offer children who struggle with language itself or learning differences?
One of the things it does is it allows kids who may be neurodiverse to work on social skills, but they get to work on social skills by working with other kids, either in terms of projects or sharing stories. It offers a sense of connection. It reduces isolation. It allows kids to kind of to to talk about similar experiences relative to self-doubts or potential self-esteem erosion around their learning struggles. There's just a number of ways that it can be helpful. One of my favorite moments during the pandemic was when we benchmarked shut down like everybody else, but we really did a really great job at transitioning to Zoom very quickly. And I had a lunch group that I was doing with a group of 5 fifth-grade girls, and we met, we set it up so each of us were in our kitchens, and we made lunch together and ate lunch together and shared recipes together, and we taught each other. We taught one girl how to make grilled cheese sandwiches, and another one how to kind of make spaghetti. I mean, these are kids, it's simple meals, but it was just so much fun to kind of hang in kind of a naturalistic way to each other, and it reduced the isolation that was so powerful at that point. I will carry that with me to my grave.
I also think it tapped into, like, another strength of yours, which is, like, you in the kitchen, because 'cause you're a really good cook, and you do it a lot.
Yeah, well, yes, I didn't do much of the advice giving though. No, 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 no. I was a group leader at that point, so I know how to make a grilled cheese sandwich, but I wasn't the one who really helped her as much as the other girls.
Did they never, like, come to realize, "Oh my gosh, Tom really knows how to cook?"
Yeah, I think one day I didn't cook it, but I had something that I had made that was left over from the night before that was fairly elaborate, and we were chatting about that. It was a chicken dish.
Let's see, you're a fellow of the American Group Psychotherapy Association, the AGPA, winner of the Harold S. Bernard Group Psychotherapy Training Award, and co-chair of the Child and Adolescent Special Interest Group nationally. What do you think is the most misunderstood about group therapy for young people?
I think there are some kids who are really frightened of group because it puts, if you have a social anxiety disorder and you come into a therapy group to really work with that. That's such an act of courage. It's sort of like having a snake phobia and going to therapy in the reptile house. So you're asking people to really put themselves in the situation that they find most frightening. And yet, those kids who have done it will tell you very quickly, this is so powerful. I remember a young woman who came into one of my groups. It was the beginning of her senior year in high school. She had had only one friend her entire life who had moved away. She was an exceptionally bright and capable student, but she shrunk away from social interactions because it just overwhelmed her with anxiety and emotion, and had pretty much had lunch by herself for the last 3 years. And she was about to go off to college, and she said, I just can't live like this anymore. She wanted to date. And so her therapist had convinced her to try one of my groups, and she came in. And one of the boys in the group said, and she just blushed the entire time and she stammered and stuttered. But the group was really kind and sort of really tried to focus on her and help pull her out. One of the boys said to the group, in the group right there, he said, I am so struck by you. You were just one of the most courageous people I think I've ever encountered. I have never met anybody as anxious as you. And to be sitting here is just so powerful and to be with you. And she beamed at just being able to hear that. And at the end of the group, she started to cry. And someone said, did we do something wrong? And she said, no, I just have never been able to talk to people like this before. It is just so wonderful and so powerful. And she became a believer. She came religiously up until the August, 2 weeks before she went to college. And she was transformed. She went to college and was able to start making friends. And some people who particularly struggle with certain kinds of anxiety are really frightened about the idea, and they stay away, and that would be just the wrong thing to do, I guess. I am worried though that I'm sort of researching this with the idea of a paper, but I think that most young people's social interaction is so mediated by technology, by text, by even FaceTime, which is at least face to face, but that there's always a sense of that kids will not talk on the phone. They haven't for a long time because they find it just too awkward. That's the word I hear. It's awkward. And that sense of not being able to manage silence, and the sense of sometimes being really uncomfortable with direct emotional expression. And so the technology allows a mediation, whether it's Discord or whether it's text messaging or other kinds of ways of communicating using Instagram, TikTok, those sorts of things. And I think that because of that, there's a real reticence about trying group therapy for some kids because they feel that it's going to be that sense of that awkward sense of sort of being able to not find an answer, or being able to express something emotionally. My referrals are down, I think. And I think part of the reason is I think kids are more reticent to try to do group than they were 20 years ago, even. The way at a time we have a national crisis in terms of mental health for adolescents and social on anxiety and with
It's almost like a fear of spontaneity. They can't handle someone else's immediate response to them, and they can't imagine not filtering themselves, making sure they craft every response.
well, they fear they can't handle it. One of the things that happens is they get into group and they suddenly find that they can handle it and they've got those skills. And there's also something that's really enlivening about having deep emotional discussions with somebody. One of the things this girl was feeling was the amount of emotional sharing that was going back and forth in that group that first time that she went in there. And so she said, I've never talked with anybody like this, but I've never really had anybody talk like this. And so that was really that was enlivening to her, but also overpowering. I do think that maybe online groups offers something kind of in between because I've been playing with that since the pandemic. I just finished writing a chapter about it, and I think the thing about online is that you don't feel the affect quite as strongly. I think it's a downside of online because you don't have the kind of same affective charge in the room. People can say things, but you don't kind of feel it viscerally. But for some kids, that little bit of mediation might make it easier for them or a step towards doing in-person groups. Or
In the spirit of disclosure, I have taken 2 courses with you so far, and during that time, you've told us many, many stories, but there's one in particular that I found deeply touching, both times I heard it, and I was wondering if you could share with us so that our audience can get, a sense of just how powerful these adolescent groups can be for teens.
well, sure, Haley, I'm happy to do that. I have, as you said, a lot of stories, and I have a lot of examples that I use in class of ways that powerful interactions that have occurred amongst kids, as well as mistakes I've made and things like that. But I believe we were talking about the power of goodbyes in groups. And in this case, it was a young woman who was at the end of she was a senior. She had started in group at the end of her freshman year. She was adopted and she came from a religious evangelical Christian family and who supported her therapy, but I had little contact with the parents. She did not want me to have contact, but they drove her almost an hour each week until she was her senior year. She had a car of her own at her disposal that she used. She could drive her own, but for a number of years they brought her um, and sat outside until after the group was over. But she was a wild child, meaning that she was really acting out a great deal sexually and some drug and alcohol use and a lot of just aggression, got in fights and stuff like that. But she was really motivated to be different. She didn't like herself for that way. A lot of the sexual stuff that she was involved with was pretty unsatisfying to her. And she wanted to use group because she found like that she wanted to hear from other people. So, and we went through several crises with her. I mean, she was got in trouble with the law one time, and so there was just a lot, and we had a lot of history together. And I was very fond of her, and I felt that she was very fond of me, but she was committed. She rarely missed group. And I share the distance because that shares a little bit of just how much of a commitment it was over 3 years. At her last group, this group at the time had a ritual where the person who was leaving would go around and offer thoughts and feelings, reactions, memories with each of the other group members. And they in turn were asked to kind of share final thoughts, goodbyes, feelings, reflect on changes that she'd made. And she had gone through this with every group member, and it was very powerful and really confirming. And it really, I think, solidified for her a lot of the changes that she really had made. People had noticed them, etc. And then usually I go last, and I looked at her and she looked at me and she says, I'm not going to, I said, she looked at me quietly. I said, you're not going to share anything with me, are you? She said, no. And I said, okay, well, let me share with you. And I told her how much proud I was of her, how much affection I had for her, really highlighted a number of the changes that she had made. I talked about just her level of commitment and how that commitment had really been a powerful message to the other group members, that I said that I would probably carry her in my heart the rest of my life. She looked at me and she nodded. And then I said, well, that's the end of this group. She stood up and she hugged everybody in the room. And then she looked at me and I looked at her and I said, I don't expect you're going to give me a hug. And she said, nope. I said, I understand. But she said, as she left, she said, Tom, don't forget to look on your desk, as she walked out of the room. And then she walked over. I walked over when she left and I picked up a Wrigley gum wrapper. This is a girl who was always chewing gum, by the way. Picked up a Wrigley gum wrapper on it and she wrote, I love you, Tom. And it just moved me. I mean, it just, that was, for her to say that to me was just as powerful as any hug, maybe more powerful, and in some ways said it all. It's, it's really those moments, which is why we do what we do. I mean, when we really, and I think there's something unique about touching young people at that. I guess I shouldn't say touch. That sounds a little awkward. Of having that level of emotional contact with a young person because you feel like they're going to carry that with them for a very long time too.
I love that story. See, I teared up again. I've heard it 3 times now. Okay. All right.
Well, you're a sentimentalist, Haley.
I think so. But you're a very good storyteller, Tom. So wrap up question. What's a fun fact about you that the board members don't know or many may not know?
I don't know that a lot of people know that I was originally wanted to go into the clergy. That was my. I think maybe you know this because I think I shared it in class. I was originally going to be a priest. I was raised in two religious traditions. I was raised Roman Catholic, although I didn't go to Catholic school. I think I was the oldest member in history to stay in CCD. I left CCD when I was 16. Most people leave like when they're 10. And that I was going to be a priest. And then I would say my high school girlfriend convinced me that maybe I wasn't ready to be a priest. And I used to go to Presbyterian services with my grandparents when I stayed with them during the summer because my grandfather was a Presbyterian deacon and he preached, and because they didn't have, it was a small country church and they didn't have a full-time minister. And my great aunt Artie played the pump organ, and my grandmother and my grandmother taught Sunday school, and so I would go there. So I actually go to mass first, and then my grandfather would take me to mass and drop me off at the priest there in Pilot Grove, and I would sit in the front row because I was young, and I'd sit there and fascinated by him because he had a gap in his teeth, and whenever he gave his homily, he had this whistle coming out of the teeth, and I would just mesmerized by that. And then I'd have to go to church again for 2 hours with my grandparents. But I was deep. I had a deep, abiding faith. I believed in Catholic social justice. Sister Joanne Malone was. I just went to Power Saver, so I may not have much time here. So I was in Catholic. I was with a social change study group. So the Berrigan brothers. Joanne went to prison with the Berrigans. But anyway, when I went to college and I started as a religious studies major, I lost my faith. I stopped believing in God, reading the Gospels. And I realized that nobody ever wrote a gospel, ever saw Jesus. They were all written by people 60 years later. And I thought, well, that's the nature of oral traditions. Anyway, I lost my faith. I really admire people of faith. I wish I had it in so many ways, but I don't. So that's something people don't know about me. I have a great deal of respect for people who are of faith. And, a lot of people, social workers, or a lot of people kind of look down on religion. I think it's a powerful part of being human.
Absolutely.
So, thank you for doing this. I look forward to, I hope I was good, and I'll look forward to.
You're wonderful. So I want to thank Tom for joining me and sharing his clinical wisdom. I wanted to mention that he will be hosting a workshop on online group psychotherapy with adolescents on June 6th from 9 a.m. to 12:15 p.m. It is an online event. And for those seeking to earn continuing education credits, those are available. Please click on the PAGPS.org website for more details. Thanks for joining us.